You were born in Saigon, Vietnam, and came to the US when you were 2 years old with your mother and your brother. You were refugees. Many of the poems in your work reflect your family's history, what you call the cartography of family. And I would like to talk about remembering and about memories, how you remember, how you build this cartography of family. How do you collect all this information to do your, or to produce your poetry?
Growing up and just experiencing the life with my mother and my grandmother on my father's side and my brother, initially that's where my memories of family began.
Mm-hmm.
And with my father, it was always a wondering of where he was. So he was a missing part of the map for the first 9 years of my life.
Because he was still in Vietnam.
Yes, because he was in a Viet Cong prison in Vietnam. And growing up, I didn't really think of the mapping. It was more like just surviving and figuring out where I was and these different cultures that I was a part of. Because at home, I would practice Cantonese and Vietnamese, and also eat Vietnamese food and Chinese food, and practice the cultures that are from my family and ancestors. And when I went to school, I would learn something completely different. So as I'm growing and trying to understand who I am and where my family fits into this land, and I realized that I need to try to recreate this map, so I have a way to follow, to learn about my family, my history, and myself. So from our stories and from our shared memories, I was able to start piecing together.
Because, for example, you don't have actual memories of your time on the boat, but you got these memories through your mother telling you and through the storytelling, or, yeah.
When bombs are exploding outside, it means that there are implosions. Vibrations travel through air and liquid. My amniotic fluid is imprinted with airplanes dropping bombs and screams and fire. In the bomb shelter in Saigon, my father teaches my 2-year-old brother French. Je m'appelle Chuc Naitat. Je m'appelle. It is October, when the winds of autumn blow strong in the Pacific. There are over 2,000 of us, sardines, barely human and starving. We sleep on the floor and wash ourselves with seawater. People are sick. When someone dies from sickness, she or he is wrapped in a blanket and tossed overboard during a Buddhist chant. I was only 2 years old and cannot recollect the dying next to me, nor can I recall my constant coughing, nor can I recollect seeing my mother's worried countenance as she contemplated our future, how my constant crying made her want to jump overboard.
Your first book, Red Thread, is from 2012. Then you have Keeper of the Winds, 2014, and Invisible Light in 2018. And you also have published chapbooks, Year of Hair, I think is 2013, and then the other one is How One Loses Notes and Sounds in 2016. In the book Red Thread, you have a poem where you explain how you became a poet, and it is called Bike Accident. Will you mind reading it?
Sure. Bike accident. My closest encounter with a rosebush was when I crashed into one. While a child and riding my bike, I thought I would challenge myself, pedal fast, let go of my feet and hands. Then I lost control and went straight into a rosebush. The bike on top of me, thorns in my body, flesh cut and bleeding. The rose entered my bloodstream and eyelids scattered over me. I guess it was then, as when Peter Parker was bitten by a spider and became Spider-Man, when I became a poet.
Besides this bike accident, what else happened for you to become a poet?
I think poetry gave me a way to express myself in a language that was very difficult for me initially, English language. I grew up, my native languages are Vietnamese and Cantonese, so those were the only languages allowed at home. And as you know, English grammar is very complicated, and there are a lot of sounds that I really struggled with as a kid, like the L and R. And then I encountered poetry, like E. E. Cummings and other poets that just gave language that freedom and gave me an ability to express myself just using words and creating without the restrictions of grammar and formal and syntax of formal language. So I found a way that I could express my feelings and thoughts, and it became for me a home, a place that I could go to.
Have you written in Cantonese or Vietnamese?
So they were my first two languages in spoken form.
Spoken form.
And I studied formal Chinese for 2 years in Chinese school, learning the characters. And Vietnamese, I didn't study the writing, but I've in recent years started studying more of the writing, and I start to incorporate it into my poetry. So in that way, I've used the languages, Cantonese and Vietnamese, in my poetry.
Yeah. And even when you write in English, do you think there is something in the language that comes from these languages, like in the underground of the poem?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think in my culture, in Cantonese and Vietnamese. So it's a whole different way of thinking. So though the English language is the vehicle of expression, because it's my strongest language of expression, my thinking is in through my other languages. Yeah.
Your second book is Keeper of the Winds, and this book explores the devastation and violence of war. But throughout the poems, there is a sense of beauty. I don't know if beauty is the right word, but there is this sense of beauty in the book without glamorizing war. And I would like to know, how do you keep that balance between addressing the tragedy and keeping the spirit of the poem?
I think in our human experiences, from the most terrible and tragic, there's also that human love and compassion. And I wanted to make sure that I also show that. Like, for example, in war, there's so much violence, but then you also have, the people helping each other, the people that are showing so much care and sacrifice.
There's one poem I would like you to read from Keeper of the Winds. The title is Depleted Uranium.
Depleted uranium. The water runs a neon color in the village. All the villagers know why the babies are born dead and deformed. Others say there's no proof it was the war. Sometimes truth can only be understood. The father carries the little body wrapped in a blanket. She will be buried with a wooden grave marker, her name inscribed with a knife. There are coffins that are only 6 inches long. If you place your hand inside, it will fit.
We have talked about your languages, and there is an element that you address in your poems, and is the fact that your own name is affected by or informed with these languages. There is a multiplicity of names in your own name, like a multiplicity of identities. There's one poem also in the same book, Keeper of the Winds, it's called Names, that I think illustrates this multiplicity in your name.
Names. I am tired of having 5 different names, having to change them when I enter a new country or take on a new life. My first name is my truest, I suppose, but I never use it, and nobody calls me by this Vietnamese name, though it is on my birth certificate, Teresa Mei Chuc. It makes the sound of a twang of a string pulled. My parents tell me my name in Cantonese is Chuc Mei Wai. 3 soft bird chirps, and they call me a Wai. After I moved to the US, I became Teresa Mei Chuc, then Teresa Mei Chuc. Teresa is the sound water makes when one is washing one's hands. After my first marriage, my name was Teresa Chuc Prokopiev. After my second marriage, my name was Teresa Chuc Dowell. Now I am back to Teresa Mei Chuc, but I want to go way back, reclaim that name once given and lost so quickly in its attempt to become someone that would fit in. Who is Teresa Mei Chuc? I don't really know. I was never really her, and her birthday on March 16, I never celebrate because it's not my real birthday, though it is on my birth certificate. My birthday is on January 26, really, but I have to pretend that it's on March 16 because my mother was late registering me after the war. Or it's in December, the date changing every year according to the lunar calendar. This is the one my parents celebrate because it's my Chinese birthday. All these names and birthdays make me dizzy. Sometimes I just don't feel like a Teresa anymore. Due isn't so embarrassing. A fruit learns to love its juice. Anyways, I'd like to be string, resonating, pulled back tensely like a bow, then reverberate in the arrow's release, straight for the heart.
It's amazing how much information a name contains.
When I returned to Vietnam to visit a few years ago, everybody called me Due. Everybody called me Due, and they knew what it meant, and it was so natural. Yeah. So it definitely makes a difference, I think, the land that you're on and the name, the connection.
Some of the language in the book, red thread in the poems, appears as prose in the chapbook Year of the Hare. So sometimes we see it in a poem form, sometimes we see it in a prose form. And you also have written creative nonfiction. You also have interviews with your parents. So how do you select the genre, or does it select itself?
Yeah, so Year of the Hare actually was the beginning. It was at this point in my life where I realized I need to face my demons. I need to face my past, and I need to understand what happened to us, to our family. And as you know, my father spent 9 years in a Vietcong prison, and he came back with severe PTSD, which affected the family. So I had to try to understand and forgive him, because we can't carry so much anger. It just breaks us up inside, and also it manifests in different ways in our life. So Year of the Hare was a kind of purging to survive. I had to write that to survive, because the trauma of the war and the consequences of the war was being carried in my body. And I had a lot of anxiety and anger and pain. And I realized I need to separate this in order for me to live, survive. And so Year of the Hare, I just wrote it all out to separate the stories from my body. I think a part of us want to hold on to these stories because it makes us who we are, and we don't want to forget them. But separating it from my body allowed me to not forget, but not have to hold on to those stories.
Your book, Invisible Light, was published in 2018. And I believe what happens in this book is that the cartography of family, the original cartography of family, expands. And then you talk about other families and other cartographies. You talk about homeless, marginalized populations, and also other victims of war. How did this expansion happen?
I think having gone through my experience in the diaspora and my family's experience being displaced and, homeless ourselves for a period of time, that compassion and understanding of suffering, of the value of human life, I think extends to our neighbors, to our community.
Yeah.
To kill correctly takes calculation, down to a science, arsenic, cacodylic acid, no water and rice on a cellular level. Make sure no surviving seed can be collected and planted, because even a small seed assures survival, because mortars, grenades, and bombs cannot destroy a grain, because our heart is made of seeds. Know what it takes to kill the seeds. Know what it takes to deprive the plant of water, to dehydrate it, to be surrounded by love, but unable to absorb it.
Is there anything you want to say about the poem or frame it a little bit?
Yes. So Agent Blue is another chemical used by the US and during the war in Vietnam. And when I learned about it, I just thought, wow, that was such calculated cruelty, because they knew in order to kill the Vietnamese people, to try to win the war, they had to destroy their food supply. So they purposefully created this chemical that would kill the rice plants, because rice needs water and needs to be able to absorb it. So Agent Blue prevents the plant from absorbing water. And I just thought, wow, I'm imagining these scientists planning this out, and just the level of cruelty.
You went back to Vietnam in your early 20s, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And there's one poem where you talk about visiting the Conson Island Cemetery, and you say that that was a life-changing experience.
So Conson Island it's a very beautiful island as part of an archipelago of islands, the Condau Islands. And on the island is a series of prison systems that was initially built by the French during the French colonial rule, including the tiger cages, which are these really cruel prisons. And during the American War in Vietnam, the U.S. reopened the prison system and put people, Vietnamese, in prison there. So visiting Conson Island and seeing that was the prison system and all the people that died there at the cemetery, and paying my respects to those that passed away through all the wars, all the colonial wars that Vietnam has experienced, was important to me. Endless gravestones, unnamed. A yellow star on each stone lights the night. I try not to breathe in spirits, but I breathe in the smoke of incense. A bat flutters by. A green grasshopper lands by my foot. Someone is saying hello. Perhaps it is a girl who died in a tiger cage. There are not enough incense sticks for all of the graves on Conson Island.
From 2018 to 2020, you were the Altadena Poet Laureate, and you edited an anthology. It's called the Altadena Literary Review. And you also have another anthology called Nuclear Impact that was published in 2017. Could you talk a little bit about these two projects?
I started a small press, Shabda Press, in 2011. And one of the early projects was this anthology I wanted to put together to raise awareness about the impact of nuclear power plants, nuclear testing on the environment and people. So I made an open call worldwide. And so this anthology is about 500 pages, and it has stories from all over the world and the impact of nuclear testing in India, in Russia, in Ireland, in New Mexico and New York, and the Midwest that were in the anthology. They connected with each other and did readings and organized readings themselves.
So what about the other anthology, the Altadena Literary Review?
So as Altadena Poet Laureate Editor-in-Chief, I worked with the co-poet laureate, Hazel Clayton Harrison, and we edited local poets, put together this anthology of local poets to show the diverse voices in our city. We really made efforts to outreach, to bring in voices that are normally not heard. So as you can see in the anthology, the back picture is someone experiencing homelessness. Actually, he wrote his poem on a cardboard.
Oh, wow.
And that poem is in the anthology in a series of pictures of his cardboards.
I would like you to select one last poem to close the conversation when I read.
Okay, so this poem that I'm going to read is about a Buddhist monk in the 1960s. There was a lot of persecution of Buddhist monks and the Buddhist community in South Vietnam, in Saigon, and part of it was because the president that was installed by the U.S. government actually was a very, very Orthodox Catholic. So he forbid Buddhism to be practiced, and so this monk wanted to let the world know what was happening, and he set himself on fire in the streets of Saigon, the city where I was born. And it really sent a huge message to the world that what are we doing there? What are we doing in Vietnam to these people when a monk has to set himself on fire to send this message? And half a century later, this message is still remembered. The heart of Thich Quang Duc is pink as a lotus blossom, unshakable in its conviction in enlightenment, self-regeneration, rising above even in a typhoon, even when that typhoon is fire that burns and sears skin, flesh, and muscles. There is no word for this kind of pain. There is no word for this kind of bravery. As the story goes, Thich Quang Duc's heart remains intact, the one thing the fire could not consume. Now it sits guarded here in the temple of my heart, in the altar of my heart, the light that lights my compassion and resistance against oppression. The scent of sandalwood incense, smoke rising to the heavens. Half a century later, I sit in lotus position, meditating, keeping my heart strong.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariano.
Thank you.